Okay, welcome. I'm here with Caleb Pettit. This is part of a thing that I'm doing for Econ Playground where we're reading through books together just while everybody's at home. And we'll see how long I want to do stuff like this. But so Caleb and I know each other from school, and so we've been reading together this past semester. Um, the Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. And William James is one of my favorite philosophers, and this is one of his most famous books. And he was also known a lot for psychology, so it's really like a psychology of religion and religious experience in a lot of ways. So, but we've been doing this since the beginning of last semester, so we're picking up actually in the middle, unfortunately. But we're starting today with lecture 9 or chapter 9, which is on conversion. But I thought we'd give a little catch up until we get to that point. So that's what we're going to do right now, real quick. So, yeah. So I'm going to go over the sort of intro, what the book is about, and then Caleb's going to go into some of the meat about other stuff that's been going on, and that other stuff that he goes into later in the book, his kind of framework of different religious attitudes. So first, I guess the way that he approaches the book as a psychologist is he says, I'm just approaching this from the question, almost like he almost might want to call it a scientific question, but he does have a goal in mind. The goal is to understand people and to understand what is happening to people when they say that they have a religious experience. So he's kind of approaching it like he understands that there's a lot of history to religion and the church and theology, but all he's concerned about right now is the personal prayer lives of people. That's one of the ways that he puts it. Is he's concerned with when people say that they experience God, what are those experiences like, and what kind of patterns do we see in them, and what does that tell us about the underlying realities there? So, so like one way that he puts it is, if you conceive of the Bible as just a historical document and all we are as historians is trying to figure out if it's true or not, then we might find errors, or it might run into the way that we do history. Or if we consider it like a scientific manual to the world, it's probably not going to, it's going to run up against the way that science is done. So he says, but if we consider it a book full of revelations about the truth from great souled persons, he calls it, or magnanimous people, then it's just as important. So he's not trying to denigrate religion or just trying to figure out what it is from a scientist perspective so he can control it or explain it away or something like that. He's trying to understand it directly because he thinks it's a part of the world over and above just our other experiences. So religious experiences are not analyzed so that we can describe them away. They're analyzed because they're real. And so he goes into that. That's how he kind of sets it up. And he says, when people say that they experience God, you don't want to just explain that away or say, oh, well, that's not real evidence or something like that. It's a real thing that they experience. So it's worth taking on consideration as evidence. So yeah. So then, and then the next part of the book is he starts to describe the different attitudes that people take. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he basically holds that there are two different general camps of how you can experience religion or have a religious experience. And so he divides that into what he calls healthy-mindedness and then being sick-souled. And so healthy-mindedness, people who he just describes as being healthy-minded, they see as happiness as being the way to truth. And so you've got people like Walt Whitman who say that they're aware of sin, but they're sort of indifferent to it, and they see all things as divinely good. They see happiness or goodness as like their lens in which they view the world and how they experience things. And so James also goes into the fact that happiness in certain cases can be counterproductive. And so these people who kind of ignore the painful realities of what we experience in life, there's like a certain benefit to having this kind of frame of reference or this way of understanding religion, and it's in a certain way like connected to the mind cure movement of the people who were basically trying to use like stop believing in sickness and the saving powers of positive emotions, and so it's also connected to that and a more liberal sense of Christianity. And then you also have the sick-souled, which kind of see the harsh realities of life. They can't look past. They can't, like the healthy-minded. They can't look past the sin or the brokenness that they see in the world. And so you've got people like Martin Luther. He always felt like very subject and very beneath his sin. People like Augustine, who were kind of tormented by the evil and their insufficiencies, and so you've got different pain thresholds and different levels and degrees to which that people are experiencing pain and have like an understanding of evil. But the people who tend to feel and see that evil manifested very strongly throughout the world, he describes as being sick-souled.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then I guess the chapter after he talks about those, he talks about the process of unification. So a sick-souled person almost has like a divided soul, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
they are pointed towards sin somehow, but they want to go somewhere else. So their soul's kind of splitting itself in two. It doesn't feel like secure, right?
Connected.
And
Yeah.
so something about religion brings the different parts of them together. And Augustine talks a lot about that in Confessions. Like he felt very attracted to sin, but he also wanted to not be attracted to it. So he had two selves, but somehow he saw one of the selves as better. He just didn't have the power necessarily to stop it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he like described the good self as like the higher self, the sin that he felt as a lower self. And even though he saw the higher self as being truer and more right, he still felt that the lower self was still a part of him, a real self within him.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like he was saying that one was more real than the other.
Yeah. Or one that was less relevant.
Yeah.
Or yeah, that's a better way to put it, probably, for simplification.
Mm-hmm.
To be more clear. Yeah. And I guess another thing I'll mention is that the way that I've been doing notes, I don't know if anybody else has seen on the side page of the website, I have a tab that says comprehensive notes. So books that I read and I want to read in depth, I'll do sometimes with someone else. Like this, for this book, I'm doing it with Caleb. Every other chapter, as we read it, we kind of go, we type up as detailed notes as possible on almost every paragraph. So, and then by the end, you have this kind of searchable document that you can use for all kinds of things. So there's already a couple up there for some big books, but the Varieties of Religious Experience is one that's coming soon to the page. So, yeah, so that's like, and that's also the document that we use to help structure our conversations too. So, so yeah, but today we read the chapter on conversion, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is like lecture 9 or so. And so first he just says, generally conversion means a transferal from a divided to united, and from sadness to happiness, from wrong to right. And this doesn't need to refer to the divine or something like that. So people have these mini conversions, like you can convert from Republican to Democrat or vice versa, or you can convert from like a Ford user to a Toyota user. If something was dissatisfactory about your car, all of a sudden
Mm-hmm.
now you are a more united person because you and your car are like more in sync or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like a way that you can think of conversion. It's not that simple, I guess. It's not. It doesn't. It's not that special. But religious conversion is this much more massive things, right?
Yeah.
So, and then he goes over the case of this guy, Stephen Bradley. And this is something that he does a lot in the book, which is something that apparently made it very unique and like a very, like a pioneering book, in that he used tons of case studies. So he would go through these people's diaries or explanations of their own experiences and read through them and put them in the book as examples of what he's trying to describe. So he uses the case of Stephen Bradley. Throughout the book, there's all these like the case of this, right? So, so Stephen Bradley was a Christian, grew up in a Christian church. I'm not sure what year this is. I think it might be a lot of his stories are from really early America for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why that is, but he goes through the case of Stephen Bradley, and then Stephen is like, he begins and he goes, he thinks he sees the Savior and the world means nothing and he desires for the welfare of mankind, but he kind of continues to go through his life, and then he was met by these revival religionists. So this might be during the Great Awakening.
Yeah.
He went to a Methodist preacher, and a fire and brimstone preacher said something like, oh, do you know if you're saved if you die tomorrow? Where are you going to go, right? And so he says, and that night the Holy Spirit attacked him, and he got his heart sped up, and he felt the Holy Spirit, and he opened the Bible or something, and Romans 8:26 and 27 lit up, and he read them, and he felt like heaven was on earth. And this strange one is, he felt that the angels care more about us than we care about them. And when he realized that, his whole like center of attention shifted, and the whole purpose of what he was doing every day shifted, and he went around speaking to his neighbors and telling them about what he saw. And yeah, so that would be like an example of conversion, where even just because the stories were in his head doesn't mean that he doesn't click all of a sudden. One day there's this massive shift of everything, and that's what a conversion experience is more like.
Yeah. I think Peterson talks about how you can have knowledge that you can't articulate. And so like if you have kids that are very young, like 4 or 5, they're playing marbles, they'll be able to play it like they know the rules, but then they actually won't be able to articulate the rules when you ask them the rules. And so eventually they get to the point where they can articulate the rules. But there is like a stage in their knowledge where they have the knowledge on how to play, even if they're not able to articulate it. And so you've got that kind of like sounds what's going on with like Bradley, is he's got this underlying knowledge and faith, but it hasn't come into a fully articulate moment. And so it snaps out from being something that he understands very abstractly, and it comes into a more articulate and like defined knowledge.
Just like my parents gave me these videos for Christmas of me as like a small kid.
Yeah.
And one of them is of me playing Candyland. And I'm really young, and I'm thinking like, how the hell do I know how to play Candyland?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that complicated. But like even that seems like it would be like, I was surprised, like, oh wow, I knew how to do that. And if you asked me at that age, I probably wouldn't know what I was doing. Okay, the next part was that's another very convenient thing. He like lays out like the topics of every chapter. So, he like and tells us what it's all about, like through each thing by page. So that's kind of how we're grouping this too. Yeah, so ideas that we have in our head kind of associate, and they become little families of ideas that I like. The ideas that I have about how to drive a car, they're all kind of like in the same mental node. And the ideas that I have about econ and the ideas I have about religion kind of operate in their own little sectors. And when I'm doing those activities, those parts of my mind light up, right? Or they get
excited.
Do you say fed?
Or excited, like activated,
excited. Yeah. And so like the example that he gives is the president, who obviously has very many things on his mind. we can imagine the president going camping, right, and actually thinking about being outdoors and stuff like that. And then the note that I put in here is it's like if you go and listen to the Econ Society podcast, which I can link in the description, about about with Tom Ristisi, he goes, yeah, so once a year I go trout fishing, right? And if you know Tom Ristisi, all he can do is talk about econ and how awesome Milton Friedman is. But I'd imagine when he's trout fishing, he's not thinking about that. And he's a different man than the one that we know from econ class. So yeah. And so if the president never went home, if Ristisi never went back to Enterprise 80, then we would consider them having converted, right?
Yeah.
The president converted to camping, or Ristisi converted to being a fisherman for his whole life, right? But the reality is that like we basically we convert every day into different people with different centers of attention, but we don't call them a conversion, like a massive conversion, just because we're always converting in those little ways.
Yeah.
And we're often oscillating back and forth, you know.
Yeah. And so the conversion is like a shift in a general tendency on where your mind is fixing upon. So
yeah, but yeah, so and even those other points of attention, they can kind of cycle. So every day you focus on work, and then you go home, and then you focus on home, and then you go to work and you focus on work and you go home. So there can be a regularity to the attention, or back and forth. And even in religion, when you go to church and you focus on church, and you go home and you focus on home. Not to say, you know, you shouldn't be a Christian at home or whatever, you know, people say all the time, but which is true. But when you're at church, you're focused on that specific thing in its own form. You know? It's like a liturgical part of life in a way. As long as so if your life is chaotic, if you're always moving, it's very hard to become one person unless you're fixed on something greater. Yeah. So he kind of, and he talks about these fields having different like points, and that like fields have these fields of ideas have focal points that we can focus on the center of those ideas, or the root of them. And so when something is emotionally exciting and moving around, and we're focused on it, it's hot and dynamic, and the side things are cold and passive, and they just are kind of sitting there waiting for us to pick them up, like a part of our mind that's on the shelf right now, right? But then this is a direct quote. He goes, whether such language be rigorously exact is for the present of no importance. It is exact enough, if you recognize from your own experience the facts which I seek to designate by it. And so this is a really good example of an important part of James, where he doesn't try to describe like incredibly precisely everything that he wants to say, because if he's talking about these kind of psychological things, he says, I can't 100% describe it, but if you've felt it, then hopefully I'm making you remember those moments, right? So he recognizes that he has to remain vague, and even though there's a temptation to be precise, the vagueness is important to actually letting things flow well. Right. So, okay, then he starts to talk about what happens with all these different, the hot spots and the cold spots. So if the hot spots, if our centers of attention are always shifting, if, like Augustine, if we go from sin to prayer to sin to prayer, then, and he feels kind of divided, right? He feels like ripped apart. And that would be like the divided self. The sick soul is like a ripped apart person somehow, right? But if he is able to shift his whole life to prayer and stick on it, then he is like fully converted. So there is this like sense of conversion doesn't have to be a one-time thing, which is sometimes the way that people talk about it, especially in Protestant circles, is I converted at this point and then I was saved, right? As opposed to it being a more fluid process of becoming more and more focused on God or something like that, or more and more focused on this hotspot, right? So if somebody has a I suppose when you're younger, you have these massive conversions more often. But as you get older, which is something that he talks about as well, that old emotions slow these kind of changes and new emotions accelerate it. So the less you engage with the world, kind of the slower these hotspots move. But the more you're engaged with things, the more like you can't just be open-minded alone in a sense.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to actually say, oh, I'm open-minded, I'm trying to learn new things, then you have to go out and you have to let new emotions change the hotspot of where you are, right?
Yeah.
Or change what you're focused on, change what your religion is in some sense. What is this part here?
Yeah. And then also, I think like the important part of the divided self is not only that you've got multiple hotspots, it's because you've got multiple hotspots when you're going from church to work to home, but it's that these hotspots are like mutually exclusive. So he's
Yeah,
like in Augustine's case, you've got a focus on sin, and then you've also got a focus on abolishing sin in his life and becoming holy. And so you've got these
yeah,
two contradictory ones that kind of splits you between when you're going back and forth, and you have no like stable ground to stand on in that way.
yeah. Yeah. So that's a very good point. And then, so in a sense, if you have the more liturgical kind of hotspot, it's almost like what your hotspot ends up becoming is the rotation, right?
Yeah.
Or is the cycle. So the one thing that Lewis says is, he says, God made us for both regularity and for change. So he gave us the seasons, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he gave us fall, spring, summer, and winter. Now, I mean, this isn't like he is trying to like say, oh, God loves us, so he gave us those specific things, but he's using that as an example of we enjoy all of them, but we also enjoy the change between them. So if you focus on the process of the years rolling by, that's kind of what you're focused on. Not it's not like I go from winter to summer to winter to summer, and like I'm confused and I want to destroy one of them, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and then I guess he talks about there being an equilibrium in the mind. Um, so like all these different forces are forcing us to focus on something, right? So the regulation that's my own conscience, or the social pressures around me, or my personal interests in something, these might keep me focused on one set of activities, but then when like the leg is kicked out from under one of them, then everything goes tail spinning into a new hotspot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you're kind of at like an equilibrium of attention until something changes.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
something like knocks your old worldview out of being some kind of stable equilibrium.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, okay, and then he talks about Starbuck, who's this guy, that he keeps bringing up over and over again in the book. Who wrote? He's like it's like the only other book on religion or something
Yeah.
that was written at this one. So because he's always citing him, and I think, oh, you know what? I think if I remember correctly, they were friends at Harvard or something. So yeah, so Starbuck notices that obviously conversion happens a lot to adolescents, right? Teenagers and such, and so he says, oh, it's just part of a simple standard pattern for moving from childhood to adulthood. Is there's some kind of, and I mean that's definitely true. Is when you're a child, you're focused on certain things that all of a sudden, when you get older, all of a sudden other things attract your attention. You go through like a conversion process. So everyone kind of converts around like the ages of 11 to 14, right?
Yeah.
In some sense, they convert to something.
Yeah.
But that's the age that you start getting interested in math or whatever. And yeah, that reminds me of something from the first chapter where he was saying there was another psychological theory of religion going on at the time, that all that religion was it was a like a sort of a useless mutation that somehow had to do with sexual development. So when you go through puberty, something happens, like some wires cross, and then all of a sudden you start having these religious experiences, like that are not supposed to be there and don't serve any function. And then James says, like, oh, well, might as well say that like math is like just because of like a weird sexual mutation, because you start to get into like schoolwork at that age, or you start to get into politics. Like, what are those things? So he says, yeah, think the mind is moving around a lot at that age. Doesn't mean that you just discount these things.
Yeah. And I think when you're that young age, but you've gotten old enough that you're kind of getting exposed to various different like schools of thought or ideas, you've got the new ideas which are constantly pushing for change, and so you have that like instability. And so when you have like some kind of conversion into religion where you've got like thousands of years old of tradition and there's a lot more stability in that, so converting into that system has like a comforting and stabilizing like effect on someone that age, especially because you go from having shifts in views and like your philosophy from one thing to the next very quickly to having something that's a lot more stable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that's what Starbuck starts talking about here a little bit, where obviously people realize this, and in many cultures, that age is when they put you through some kind of ritual, where you grow up through this ritual, and this is like becoming a man or becoming a woman, period. And it forces the way the Starbucks says it is it forces them to make conclusions through stress, or so different given social structures provide ready-made answers for this child. So when they're confused, this is when they latch onto a tradition and help the tradition. The tradition helps them move forward, right?
Yeah.
And so he goes, obviously there's suggestion and imitation involved here. So he has a whole footnote on Jonathan Edwards. Let me get to it real quick. Jonathan Edwards was a famous Baptist preacher, right? So on the concept of the form in which these different pre-appointed instructions affect the adolescent that's going through these period, it has to do with suggestion and imitation. And this is a quote from James in the footnote here. No one understands this better than Jonathan Edwards understood it already. Conversion narratives of the more commonplace sort must always be taken with the allowances which he suggests. This is Edwards speaking now. A rule received and established by common consent has a very great, though to many persons an insensible influence in forming their notions of the process of their own experience. I know very well how they proceed as to this matter, for I have had frequent opportunities of observing their conduct. Very often their experience at first appears like a confused chaos, but then those parts are selected which bear the nearest resemblance to such particular steps as are insisted on, and these are dwelt upon in their thoughts, and spoken of from time to time, till they grow more and more conspicuous in their view, and other parts which are neglected grow more and more obscure. Thus, what they have experienced is insensibly strained, so as to bring it to an exact conformity to the scheme already established in their minds. And it becomes natural also for ministers who have to deal with those who insist upon distinctness and clearness of method to do so too. This is from his treatise on religious affections. So yeah, so they've got this pre-scheme of like the Trinity and Jesus and him dying for your sins and all these different things, and just they kind of put this image before you, and then they let this person who's confused kind of slowly sort through things until they approach that image, right?
Yeah.
And then they can become comfortable in that image as their hotspot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is very interesting. And then he compares it with this is what he says directly about more liturgical churches. In Catholic lands, for example, this is James, sorry. In Catholic lands, for example, and in our own Episcopalian sects, no such anxiety and conviction of sin is usual as in sects that encourage revivals. The sacraments being more relied on in these more strictly ecclesiastical bodies, the individual's personal acceptance of salvation needs less to be accentuated and led up to. But So in more liturgical churches, it's almost less chaotic in a way. Or I feel like they just kind of are presenting it, and it's more integrative of the different parts of the body too, but it's slower.
Yeah.
And it's less about people will accept it even if you don't say like, oh, I had this massive vision, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's seen more as a process, and there's a structure that you're falling into that's a lot more formalized and ritualized. So where you have like a non-denominational church, you'll have a lot less structure in their services and in their the theology of any given church there, and so you've got less to latch onto and more to struggle with still. And so when you're going from one way to the other, it's still going to be something quick and sudden. But you got with the liturgical churches, you've got some process that you're like imitating yourself, and you've got something very clear to imitate.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, and well, and then the next paragraph on page 201, he says, he gets very clear, and he says, but every imitative phenomenon must once have had its original, and I propose that for the future we keep as close as may be to the more first-hand and original forms of experience. These are more likely to be found in sporadic adult cases. So, so he says, just because they're imitating someone doesn't mean they're just like accepting some lie, because those traditions are founded in experiences. And so that's something
Yeah.
that the Orthodox Church always stresses, is that all of their doctrines are founded in people experiencing these things,
Yeah.
right? And there is no like, oh, we just thought of it and then we said it. Because a thought is in a way an experience too, which people forget about oftentimes. There's experiencing, and then there's thinking, and but those thinking is kind of like an internal backwards, like looking through like a hall of mirrors kind of way of experiencing something. You know what I got into, I just rediscovered, is these magic eye pictures. Have you ever done those?
No.
The here, I'm gonna try and find one real quick, because I want to use them to explain the way that James and Smith think about things. Um, Here, I'll just share it on the screen real quick, and anybody can look up Magic Eye, right?
I just pulled
You
up
even
some
try.
pictures on Google, and then yeah.
Yeah, have you seen these?
No, I haven't seen these before.
Okay, because what happens is I don't know if you can do it on the screen, but look it up on your own screen later. And then basically the way that it works is you like stick your face up to it, and then you like pull it out slowly, and it becomes a 3D image that like locks in, and then like you can look at it normally and it's a different picture with like 3D stuff coming out of it.
Really?
Yeah. So the way, this is like a detour, but I think it's
Yeah.
awesome. And there's a lot of cool stuff in here. So the you guys can hear in the background, that's probably Hayden playing marimba,
That's Hayden playing the marimba.
which is nice. It's good background music. But so I just read a different essay by James called Great Men and Their Environment. And one of the ways he talks is he goes, um, if you're looking at the details of something, right, you lose the bird's eye view,
Yeah.
right? But if you're looking at the bird's eye view, you lose the details of something,
Yep.
right? So he goes, so which one is correct? Well, they're both correct, right? So what you want to do is you want to find the particulars of something and then move outwards and keep moving outwards in such a way that you never forget those details and what makes those details important. And then when you're at the larger picture, you can see how all the details play into making that larger thing. So with these magic eye pictures, if I just look at the picture, it's like just the whole picture. But if I look at one spot, I can tell what's going on in the spot, but somehow the process of me moving and looking in a certain way makes me see how those details play when familiarized with and then pulled out. Now, I don't know if that's exactly
Yeah.
how the optical illusion works, but they were big. It was big in the 90s. So it was big in the 90s. That's all I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess we'll move on from that. Okay, where were we with the rest of the stuff?
We just did.
Oh, Luba. Who
Yeah,
was
we're
that?
about to do Luba.
Okay, Luba. I forgot about this part. Um, um, oh, yes, 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 that's right. So a big part of conversion is the feeling of release from sin.
Mhm.
That sin no longer has power over you, right? And he tells this whole story of this guy, S.H. Hadley, which I didn't elaborate on in the notes so much, but it was oh yeah, it was a guy who's like a drunk, and he like gets so drunk and he tells them to put him in jail, and they put him in jail, and then he was stuck in this narrow cell for like 3 days, and then he comes out and he's like healed, right?
Well, no, so he
Oh,
goes and tells the bartender at his bar to never serve him alcohol again, and then he goes to um, some it was some preacher or whatever who did Mr. Owley, who Jerry Owley, who did it was like a church thing, but it was also kind of like an AA thing. They kind of like worked hand in hand, and so he went to that, and then had like 25 or 30 people talk about um, their experiences of being saved from alcohol, and then
mm-hmm.
um, he describes that as like this pivotal moment.
So,
Yeah,
speaking of which, actually, I think this book, Varieties Religious Experience, inspired the Alcoholics Anonymous.
yeah,
Yeah. So obviously they're that kind of thing, being fixated on alcohol or any kind of addiction. You can kind of get converted out of an addiction. That's like a smaller conversion experience. That's a more significant than going from work to home, but it's it's not like a religious thing per se, but to some people it is because it's their whole life
hmm
is alcohol and then it becomes something else.
yeah,
Yeah. I haven't this is where I realize one that like Paul Vanderklay in his videos, he when he talks about like people and things they go through, they he has a lot of actual experience with them because he's a pastor. So he's
yeah,
met a lot of people and talked to them about their problems, which is something that pastors do that most people forget about,
hmm
is talk to people about their problems
yeah,
and
doing counseling and working through problems and stuff. Yeah,
mm-hmm, their mortgage problems.
the what?
Did you say their mortgage problems?
No, like marriage problems and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
counseling.
Yeah, I've got a ton of marriage problems. Okay.
Yeah,
The yeah, so that is a conversion that's not really theological, right?
yeah,
Whereas in the previous chapter, in the divided self chapter, he talks about Tolstoy's conversion, which is profoundly theological. So yeah. So and then he goes, hey, some people maybe we just can't convert them somehow, right?
yeah,
Sometimes somebody's just not fertile. Maybe they've blocked these reasons, or they have a hard heart. That's what we call a hard heart. When it says in the Bible that Pharaoh had a hard heart and he didn't let Moses' people go, right? Just even though Pharaoh is clearly seeing all these plagues happen, he has a hard heart for some reason, you know.
yeah.
And so this is I made the note. So this is what Jesus is talking about when he says, "Don't throw pearls before
Pearls before
swine."
swine.
Yeah, in that what not that these people are irredeemable, but just not every moment is the right moment to do that kind of
Yeah,
leading and sharing and converting of people. It's not like everyone has a button on their body somewhere and you just need to find it.
yeah,
Sometimes just like it's hidden. Okay, just calm down. Um, okay, two types of conversion: the volitional type, the type that's like I'm gonna convert, right? And the self-surrender type, where you kind of open up and then some other force does something for you, right?
yeah,
So then he goes, um, a volitional type. The getting rid of an alcohol addiction can be either type, right? Sometimes something like that. The case of Hadley, something just changed him, that he didn't understand necessarily, right? But usually, like getting over an alcohol addiction is something more volitional, like I'm going to take this step, then I'm going to take this step, then I'm going to take this step, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's what the steps are.
Yeah.
See, it all comes together.
All comes together.
Yeah, so volitional case is by building up habits one by one by one. Like, oh, I drink 5 times a day, and then tomorrow I'm going to drink 4 times a day, which is a lot, but it's a step, right? So, but then he says the self-surrender type is still in there, right?
Yeah.
Kind of, it's just like little self-surrenders, right? It's not a total opening up of your heart or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but then the self-surrender type is a little bit more complicated. I'm not sure I understand it wholly. This is a full quote that I'll just read here that I put in the notes. Man's extremity is God's opportunity is the theological way of putting the fact of the need of self-surrender, whilst the physiological way of stating it would be, let one do all in one's power and one's nervous system will do the rest. Both statements acknowledge the same fact, which is strange because this is something that people will always try to finagle with James and with someone like Jordan Peterson too, where they'll use theological language, but then they'll always talk about brain science or something like that, and you'll go, oh, then you don't actually believe in it, right? You just think it's psychological illusions, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, he kind of goes like that self-surrender is this very important thing in religious history, right? You move from Catholicism, and then he says that there's a little bit of self-surrender that brings you to Lutheranism, and a little bit of self-surrender to Calvinism, to Wesleyanism, which is Methodism, and then to liberal theology, and then to transcendental idealism. And then I took issue with this. I don't think this is a very good map, actually, right?
Yeah.
Because first of all, there's no Eastern Church. It starts at 1054, right? And then obviously many people remained Catholic. And I guess maybe he's just saying the more loose you get, you end up just becoming a liberal theologian. He's not saying like it's an obvious progression, right?
Yeah.
You can see it, but Wesleyanism did not come from Calvinism. It came from Anglicanism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
But
and Anglicanism didn't come from Lutheranism. It was like legitimized by it in some way. It was allowed because of it, but it theologically didn't come from Lutheranism.
I don't think he's saying that one necessarily poured into the other, but these kind of like rose up in succession of becoming more and more liberal theologically over time. And so I guess what he's saying is you kind of started with something that was more structured, and then over time options for looseness spiritually have become more readily available and more popularized, even if you still have the Eastern Church and you still have the Catholic Church and Anglicans and Calvinists. You've got more and more loosening happening or becoming available over time.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that in some sense, the Eastern Church, especially the Desert Fathers, is entirely about self-surrender.
Yeah.
In that they would go. I don't know who I was hearing talk about this recently. I think it was Pajot, but I don't remember exactly. But he ends up going. The point of going out to the desert, that the reason that they went to the desert. Oh gosh, who was saying it?
Was it
It was
in
Vander.
the
I think it was
was it
Vanderlei.
was it from the gosh, the individual book, the shoot, where is it, the student top, inventing the
No,
individual, because he talks about the
he talks about them, yeah,
okay.
but it was not from that. It was I think it was Vanderlei. I think it was Vanderlei's most recent video. But basically he said that. Oh yeah, I think it was definitely Vanderlei. Now that I think about it, it was definitely Vanderlei's most recent video. the one on the kinfolk, like he read a whole article on like a fashion company, and like their process of they were Mormons that got married and they started a fashion company, and then they like lived this whole like pure aesthetic life that was like perfect and picturesque, and then ended up falling apart because they had like hidden a couple things from each other, and then it all fell apart. And they had founded this company that was like, if you hear like hashtag blessed, you've heard like
Yeah.
there's almost like this like specific like aesthetic that comes along with these things sometimes, and they were apparently the company that came up with all that stuff.
Wow.
So but then Paul Vanderklay read the article, and he just loved reading it. I made that comment, and then Paul loved the comment. He put a love on it. So on YouTube, which always is great. That's what it's great. That's why it's great to be a Paul Vanderklay fan, because he doesn't have many fans. So he actually reads your comments. Isn't that great? Yeah.
Yeah.
But what was I talking about? Oh yeah. So and then at some point in the article, he
Desert
talked about,
Fathers.
yeah. So the point of the Desert Fathers was that somebody can go out to the desert, and then just like going out on a camping trip, all of these hot spots become cold, and they go to the back of your mind. So you wipe everything clean so that you can talk to God more directly because you're in the desert. So the desert was a sign of purity.
Yeah.
Right? And in many ways, I'm reading the third Dune book right now, and there's a character that's showed up where at this point in the story, the religion of Muad'Dib is already established, and like one of the main characters basically like becomes like a prophet, and they've established this religion, and it takes over the whole galaxy. And then this character shows up in the third book called, they only know him as the preacher, and he has come out of the desert.
Yeah.
And he's come out of the desert and he's just starts speaking like, oh, this religion has gone the wrong way, and you've all been caught up in your, priestly issues, but I have the pure knowledge from the desert. But then what he says is what happened with Protestantism is they tried to turn that sense of being completely disconnected from the world and just make it always for everyone.
Yeah.
So what you're doing on Earth is almost irrelevant in some ways. Like it's almost like everything is like cut, and I don't know. I don't really know how to describe it. So you're like the more extreme Protestants are people like the Amish, right? Who particularly deny themselves of as many worldly pleasures as possible, so that they can be more properly follow Christ as they see it. But the way that the older model was, a monk can go out to the desert and be pure, and then the monk in the Siedentop book, Inventing the Individual, which is about the history of Christianity, he describes monks as spiritual athletes, which I thought was a really interesting term for it. And that's something that I realized Voltaire said about the Protestant Revolution, where what Luther did and what Calvin did, was they opened the doors to all the convents and the monasteries and had everyone pouring out, and then but that doesn't mean they freed all these people from these chains, right? What they did instead is they just turned the whole world. They wanted to make the whole world a monastery.
Yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying.
That's what Voltaire had to say about Calvin. So Calvin wanted to turn Geneva into a political monastery.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by Calvin's Geneva. I want to learn more about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Voltaire's way of putting it is very good. That they tore down the doors to the convents and the monasteries, but by doing that, they turned the whole world into a monastery.
Yeah, where all your religion is supposed to be based on internal reflection only, is what you're saying?
Well, and denial of and ascetic life. Denial of the world as your source of pleasure.
Okay, yeah.
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 And then what did that have to do with what we were talking about? Oh yeah, just the Eastern Church being about self-surrender, but it's not the whole church.
Yeah.
It's just these desert father or people that choose to live that way.
Yeah. Certain organs in the body.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. So yeah, my eyes, like when I open my eyes, I'm risking getting stuff in there, right? But
Yeah.
that's the only way to allow the light in, right? I'm risking like pieces of dust flying in my eyes, but that's also the only way to let light in so that I can see things,
Yeah, exactly.
right? So the monks are like the eyes of the church in some ways,
Yeah.
or
And so you,
yeah,
yeah, so you only have like a certain aspect of the body or the church fulfilling that certain function, and then you've got other people performing other like tasks or functions throughout the church.
yeah. Usually
That's going
monks
nowhere.
are economically self-sufficient,
Yeah,
or they try to be, right?
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But I don't think it's ever the idea. I need to look more into this, but I don't think it's ever considered the ideal that everyone becomes a monk, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. Um, okay, fascinating. That's stuff to look more into. Um, okay, is there anything else that we want to talk about?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Then the next chapter is also on conversion. So,
Yeah.
and it's much longer actually. So, yeah, we'll be coming back to you with that one soon enough. Um, yeah, let us know if anything didn't make sense or didn't. I don't know. Yeah, what do you think? Let us know if you like this format, because I'm going to be trying this out with a lot of different people reading different things. So I've got a couple people that I want to do certain things with that we'll catch up on soon. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I won't say who those are right now, but we'll get to those soon.
Okay.
Okay, very good.
All right.
Okay, well, see you guys later. I guess. Bye-bye. I guess. Oh, you know what we'll do? We'll link the document and
Do the videos for
yeah,
those
in the
sections.
videos, in the description of this, I'll link to the document that we're putting notes in, so you can see us update it live if you catch us in the act, right? And you can see the full text, because the full text is on Google Books and Gutenberg.org and stuff like that, because it's an old book. So we get it for free. I like ebooks. Everyone says like, oh, I have to have it in my hands. Just shut up. No, you don't. It's very convenient. Please, let's be honest here. Yeah, margin notes. I don't do margin notes. You know, I don't need margin notes.
I'm a big fan of doing books, physical books, because I can highlight and I can write in them.
Yeah. Oh, guess what? You can do with comments and highlighting on the computer.
It's not the same, dude.
It's actually the same and better. But okay, we'll see
No.
you guys. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye. Bye.